He built an empire to forget the one thing he ever wanted, a real connection. Now, success was a gilded cage, and the past was about to reappear on a rain-slicked sidewalk, demanding a price he never calculated. The world saw Elias Thorne, the youngest self-made billionaire in the city, and they saw power. What they missed was the clinical precision with which he had stripped his life of anything messy, especially emotions. His penthouse, 50 stories above the city, was a temple to minimalist ambition. Its only decoration the sweeping, impersonal view. Elias's biggest flaw wasn't ruthlessness in business. It was his fundamental inability to connect. 5 years ago, a painful but fleeting relationship with an art student ended when he made a cold, final calculation. Love was a distraction, family a weakness. He chose the empire. His emotional need was simple: control. He needed to believe that if he accumulated enough power, he could protect himself from ever being hurt again. Miles away, the rain was not a view, but a relentless enemy. Lena Rivas was huddled in the doorway of a boarded-up boutique. Two identical small bodies, Leo and Lily, 5 years old, pressed against her. Lena's flaw was perhaps a fierce, almost destructive pride. She had sworn she would never ask Elias for anything after he vanished, choosing poverty and struggle over admitting she was desperate. Her emotional need was safety for her children, safety that pride made her seek alone. She clung to a worn children's book, the twins' only toy. She knew she was failing, but the thought of his judging gaze kept her paralyzed. As Elias's sleek black sedan pulled away from his high-rise, driven by a stoic chauffeur, it sliced through the downpour like a missile. His mind was already on the hostile takeover plan for the morning. He barely registered the landscape of the city's margins. But tonight, a detour caused by flooding would force his path right past the abandoned boutique, bringing the two worlds, the pristine, controlled universe of Elias and the chaotic, desperate reality of Lena, into lethal proximity. The window between them was about to drop. The detour forced Elias's sedan down the shadowed, forgotten street. Inside the insulated car, the world was a silent movie. Elias was reading a financial report on his tablet, the blue light reflecting in his cold, focused eyes. But the sheer brutality of the rain was forcing even the driver to slow to a crawl. As they passed the boarded-up storefront, something made Elias look up. It wasn't the noise. It was the color. A flash of a bright red umbrella and a small, vibrant patch of yellow rain boot. Under the inadequate shelter, Lena was trying to soothe Leo, who was crying silently from the cold. Lily, the other twin, was meticulously cleaning the worn leather of her mother's shoe with a corner of her own soggy blanket, a small, desperate act of caring. Lena looked up at the sound of the slow-moving car. For a split second, her eyes met Elias's across the glass. The connection was immediate and physical, a cold jolt that bypassed his business mind. Elias didn't recognize her face. Years of stress and struggle had carved new lines into Lena, and the low-light made her look almost like a stranger. But he felt a crushing, sudden familiarity, a memory of a warm summer night, a specific scent of rain on concrete, and a laugh he hadn't heard in years. He saw the woman, exhausted and huddled. He saw the two small children, identical, with those same unervingly intense blue eyes that he saw every morning in his own reflection. A flicker of guilt, the kind he usually crushed instantly, pierced him. He saw the scene not as a social problem, but as a specific, painful illustration of human vulnerability, something he prided himself on avoiding. He felt an urge, a stupid, illogical urge, to stop the car, to open the door and ask, "Are you okay?" But the thought was instantly overridden by the ingrained habit of control and self-preservation. It's not my problem. Getting involved is risky. Stay focused. He looked away, back down to his tablet, willing the memory of those blue eyes to vanish. "Drive on, Smith," he muttered, his voice tight. Lena watched the luxurious car glide away, the expensive tires splashing the sidewalk. She felt no anger, only a deep, bone-weary certainty. He didn't see me. He didn't see us. She hugged the children tighter, her reaction revealing her inner conflict. Relief that he hadn't recognized them, protecting her pride, and a fresh, silent wave of heartache that he hadn't noticed the humanity in front of him. The pivotal moment passed, an unseen, unheard collision of two lives. But the seed of doubt had been planted in the billionaire's mind, a tiny splinter of memory that would begin to fester. The next morning, Elias Thorne was in his high-rise office, surrounded by polished steel and glass, yet he felt a strange, distracting coldness. He was resistant to the memory of the previous night. He tried to deny it, rationalizing the image away. It was just two kids. They all looked the same. It was the rain playing tricks. His resistance manifested as aggressive work. He dismissed two senior executives over minor slip-ups, seeking to restore the feeling of absolute control the memory had challenged. The tension was rising within him, making him irritable and sharp. But the sight of those twin blue eyes, his eyes, though he didn't know it, was a stubborn ghost. He kept rubbing the side of his neck, a nervous habit he hadn't had since childhood. The external conflict began subtly. Elias's usually efficient assistant, David, interrupted him with an unusual item, a delivery from a forgotten storage unit containing his belongings from 5 years ago. Elias hadn't wanted these things. He had ordered them destroyed. The box was full of old university texts and, crucially, a small, handmade sketchbook, Lena's. Elias tossed the box aside, resistant to opening it, resistant to the past. He was facing external pressure from his board to finalize a difficult merger, which only fed his inner turmoil. Focus on the merger. Focus on the money. That is real. Meanwhile, Lena was struggling with her own resistance. She had found a temporary job washing dishes in a busy downtown restaurant, forced to leave Leo and Lily with a tired, elderly neighbor. Her conflict was rooted in her fierce pride. She resisted admitting the severity of her situation, even to the neighbor. She worked until her hands were raw, denying the gnawing fear that she couldn't keep her children warm and fed through the winter. Her resistance turned into anger when she got home. Lily had drawn a picture, a small, dark car driving away in the rain. "Is that a car, sweetie?" Lena asked, forcing a smile. "It's Daddy's car," Leo piped up. "The big, black, shiny one." Lena's heart seized. She had never shown them a picture of Elias. This was an echo of her memory, a shared subconscious pain. "No, darling," she said, her voice tight. "Daddy doesn't have a car like that. Daddy, he's gone." This denial was her way of protecting them and herself from the truth. She resisted the terrifying thought that the children might be seeing their father around. The coincidence was too cruel. Later that week, Elias finally, reluctantly, opened the old box. He picked up the sketchbook. Flipping through, he found not just beautiful drawings, but familiar, looping handwriting. Elias plus Lena, forever. The last page was a sketch of an expensive silver locket he had given her. The locket he had assumed she had thrown away. The locket was gone from the drawing. His resistance crumbled slightly, replaced by a cold knot of dread. He knew he had to find out if the woman on the street was her. Elias couldn't shake the drawing or the locket. The dread had evolved into an undeniable, cold certainty that those were his children. Using his vast network, he quietly located Lena, not to offer money, but simply to observe, driven by an overwhelming primal need he couldn't name. He learned she volunteered at a community center's after-school program, often staying late because she couldn't afford childcare. One damp evening, Elias drove to the center, parking his car blocks away and walking the rest of the distance in clothes far too expensive to blend in, but chosen precisely because they weren't a three-piece suit. He watched through a pane of frosted glass. Lena was reading the children's story, but she was interrupted by a minor disaster. A shelf tipped over, scattering toys and books. The center's only other staff member was ill. Elias, seeing the two small bodies of Leo and Lily near the clutter, acted without thought. A rare moment of instinct over calculation. He walked in. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "I saw you needed help." Lena straightened, shock freezing her face. 5 years had changed him, adding lines of stress and wealth, but the intensity of his gaze was unmistakable. Forced proximity had struck. "Elias," she whispered, the name tasting like ash and old sorrow. "What are you doing here?" He ignored the question, moving to lift the shelf. His movements were awkward, his billionaire hands in used manual labor. This provided the light humor of the scene. Lena almost smiled watching the tycoon struggle with a plastic shelf. As they worked, the twins, unburdened by history, approached Elias, drawn by his unfamiliar, towering presence. Lily pointed to his expensive watch. "Is that a star?" she asked. Elias crouched down, another awkward movement. "It's a clock," he said, using the moment to study their faces. The blue eyes, the slight dimple Leo had, they were undeniably his. "What are your names?" he asked, though he knew. "I'm Leo." "That's Lily," Leo said proudly. "We're 5. Elias felt a heavy silence, the kind that speaks volumes. Subtext: he should have been there for 5 years of birthdays. Lena watched, her defenses slowly lowering. She saw not the cold contract killer, but a lost, overwhelmed man trying to interact with children he should have raised. They love to hear stories," she said, vulnerability entering her voice. "About the ocean." Elias looked at her, truly looking for the first time since that rainy night. "I remember you always wanted to live near the sea," he said softly. "I remember you always wanted to own the whole city," she countered, but without bitterness, just a shared memory. They had opened up a painful line of communication, stepping over the threshold of polite indifference. The emotional stakes were now immense. Elias was not just dealing with a past girlfriend, but with the 2 small lives staring up at him, asking him about stars on a watch. The next 2 weeks were a strange climax. Elias didn't try to buy Lena's silence or offer a cold financial solution. Instead, he returned to the community center. He wasn't Elias Thorne, the billionaire. He was just Elias, the father trying to learn how to tie a tiny shoelace and sit patiently through a game of blocks. The confrontation came naturally one evening after the children were asleep at Lena's tiny apartment, which Elias had quietly, secretly made warm and safe. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elias finally asked, his voice low. Lena gripped the silver locket around her neck, the one Elias thought she had discarded. "You told me 5 years ago that your future had no room for distractions, no room for mess," she said, her eyes glistening. "I was messy. I was pregnant. I couldn't risk you looking at my babies the way you looked at me then, like a liability." Elias stood, walking to the window. He saw his reflection, still cold, but now fractured by regret. "I was wrong," he admitted, the 3 hardest words he had ever spoken. "When I drove past you in the rain, when I chose to look away, I didn't see a beggar. I saw something familiar, something I knew I had destroyed, and I was too much of a coward to face the consequences." He turned back, offering no money, no contract, only the bare truth. "I drove past my own destiny that night. I want them to have their father. Lena, I want you back, too. I don't know how to build a family, but I'm ready to learn. I need to be better." Lena walked towards him and touched the lapel of his expensive, slightly wrinkled jacket. "I love the man who is here, Elias," she said, "not the one who drives a black car past people who need him." The resolution wasn't a sudden kiss, but a quiet, profound moment of reconciliation. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn children's book, the exact same title Lena had been holding the night he drove past. He had searched until he found a pristine copy. "Can we read this to them tomorrow?" She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that erased the 5 years of pain. "We can." Months later, they stood together, not on the cold, rainy sidewalk, but on the new porch of a modest house near the ocean, Elias's quiet tribute to her past dream. The twins, Leo and Lily, were chasing waves, their laughter ringing clearly. Elias looked at Lena, feeling a surge of emotion that made his old, cynical heart ache in a wonderful new way. He realized the most expensive, luxurious thing he owned was not his tower, but this simple, messy, beautiful moment of redemption. The twin blue eyes that had pierced him from the darkness now shone brightly with pure joy. The man who had sought control had finally found peace in surrender. Unexpected love had not just entered his life. It had rebuilt him from the ground up,